Dawn, it is so wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
It's great to see you too, Erica. After a little while, we had a bit of a pause, and
Mhm.
then you're back in my world again.
I know, I know. Yeah, so for all of you listening, I met Dawn, oh my gosh, 20 years ago, I think, when I was a student at Chautauqua Institution. And then through social media and all of those wonderful things, we've been able to stay in contact. And now I'm at Chautauqua and had a lovely time visiting with Dawn before that position started in New York City, where he had work up at Jim Kempner Gallery in Chelsea. And so it's so great to see you and hear. I'm excited to dive into all the things you do because Dawn, you do a lot.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about things too.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
I'm excited to hear you do such a great job talking about things and talking to people that I enjoy seeing where the conversation goes.
oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I really, really appreciate that. So I thought where we would start with this because I know so many people are interested. You've had such this wonderful and very like long career teaching, showing your work, starting different initiatives for artists and to serve artists. Let's go back to the beginning where you first became invested in the arts. Can you take us back to how that began for you? How you knew, okay, I'm going to go on this path of making and painting.
You mean people do things other than art?
Right? Like there's a choice. It was just
There's a
there.
choice. Nobody told me there was a choice. I'm one of those people. I mean, there are people who come to art later in life. You know, Matisse came to art later in life. You know, he only came to it after he got sick, and his father bought him a set of paintbrushes while he was recovering, and watercolors or something, and the rest was history. But I um I always, my entire life, I always thought I would be an artist from the time as early as I can remember, which is kind of unusual for most artists, I think.
Mhm.
But I was, I remember being 4 years old and going to my grandfather's house, and he was an insurance salesman, and he had all these reams of paper that were white on one side. And I would go over there on Saturday morning and I would draw all day on the backs of those pieces of paper. And so it never occurred to me that I wasn't going to be an artist, except for like there was this little period of time after my junior year in college.
Mhm.
I thought, oh, you can't eat paintings. I should do something practical. And so I thought I did. It's interesting. I've looked this up. There are a lot of artists who thought about law school and business school. And I thought about it. I actually applied to law school and got in, but had now that lasted about 6 months, that thought.
Mhm.
And then I had an internship at the Corcoran in Washington. And I was nothing against lawyers, but I was in a dorm full of pre-law of lawyers, of students who were going to law school at GW. And I realized I did not want to do that for the rest of my life, that a career is a long time. And I wanted to do what I loved. And
Yeah.
I never did go to law school. I ended up staying with the art thing, doing, thumping along at the beginning, trying to figure out how to pay for my habit, um, teaching. I taught every level of school, every from preschool to through high school, early on, and eventually ended up moving to New York, and because that's what I really wanted to do. So
Mhm. Mhm.
that's how it started for me, anyways.
Well, I think it's interesting you bring up this like 6 month period of questioning because I think that's something that everybody who's studying art or heading kind of in that direction does. I was one of the ones that thought of law school for a hot second.
Yeah.
Didn't apply, didn't go to an internship. I maybe I should have, but and I think that's like a healthy moment, right? I was talking actually to students this summer at Chautauqua, where one of them was having kind of like this freak out, we're like, what am I doing? Where am I going? And I said, that's totally normal. Like, I don't think if you have that moment sometimes where you have to choose a path, I think it's healthy to do that. So I love hearing the story of the 6 months. So you end up moving to New York, and I'm really excited to hear about, you get there and your experience at the New York Studio School, because I've always loved the New York Studio School. I think it's an incredible space. Tell me about your experience there.
My experience with the studio school was amazing. I got there, it was still young when I got there. Um, the woman who founded it, Mercedes Matter, who was, one of the original 9th Street women, incredible person, incredible artist, very dedicated, tenacious, un, impossible, incorruptible, totally incorruptible.
Mhm.
And I went there as a student, and she, toward the end of my first, actually, it might have been the first semester, she asked me to start working for them at the school. She was the dean at the time. She founded the school. Mercedes and a group of students, a couple of whom I actually had come up to Chautauqua when I was up there.
Was Mark Zimmerbaum one of them?
Mark was one of them. Yeah, Mark,
Yeah.
Chuck Connor.
Yeah.
People. So, my initial impulse at Chautauqua was to kind of do everything I loved about the studio school and leave everything out that I didn't love about the studio school. But anyway, my time at the studio school, I'd gone to 5 different schools, including the studio school, and the one that really built me, or really gave me that sense of purpose and meaning, was the studio school, because we had these incredible faculty there. I think people are lucky if they get 1 or 2 great teachers in their life, and I had a plethora of great teachers. Mercedes and Gretna Campbell and Esteban Vicente, Alice Neal, Guston was around a little bit. There were many people. Lane de Kooning. I'm looking at my bookshelf over there to figure out who to mention.
That's the beauty of the New York Studio School. I feel like, is there was like this time I would have died to have studied with Mercedes. Although I heard she didn't really like her female students. I don't know if that's true or not.
True. Oh,
but
well, no. But see, okay, I don't know.
a different time.
I don't know if this makes it into the final cut or not. But the studio school at that time, it was a very interesting place, and Mercedes really was not particularly nice to her female students, and only to some of her male students. She was very tough. The way you think of like Lee Krasner, who also came to the studio school, but she was counterbalanced with Nick Caroni, who only liked his female students, didn't have anything to do with the men. Both of them were really important in my life, but they kind of counterbalanced one another.
And I think that's something also beautiful that happens in really good programs, and still I would have been there with Mercedes if I could have, even if she hated me or not, because I know she was dedicated. Like it was about the art. It was about seeing, it was about making. And
art with a capital
so
A, and nothing peripheral, totally focused on who you are as an artist, period. There are other things that are important, but those you deal with in other parts of your life. What she built that school around was the idea that you were completely focused on making your art and finding out who you were as an artist, with a genuine sense of language, some kind of language. One of the things I always say is I got, a lot of my teachers there gave me a very good beginning in terms of, from George McNeil to George. For me, George was a person who taught me never to trust my first impulse, because it's too conscious and too shallow. And how do you push through that? Nick talked about metaphysics, but also about, things like the diagonal and the vertical and what they did, and a lot of form-based ideas. They all taught about form and sort of modernist ideas, but I don't think any of them thought of that language as art. They just thought of it as a way of getting to who you are. that one needs a language in order to write poetry, but we're not going to tell you what poetry is. We're just giving you the language. And then what you do with that language, keep it, reject it, work your way through it, work your way around it. That was all a big part of it too. Mercedes was really interesting because she had that kind of almost academic sense of things. And I use that word very cautiously because people have a certain idea when you talk about what's academic. But she would use that language, but then she'd bring in Nam June Paik, and she'd bring in John Cage and Philip Glass and Morty Feldman, and all these people who were outside of her frame of reference to the school. And she always said, well, if what you have and what you're teaching can't stand up to something outside of that frame of reference, then that frame of reference isn't worth holding on to. So it wasn't that they were teaching modernism, but they were teaching modernism because they were coming out of abstract expressionism, a lot of them. And they were, but they weren't teaching it to make you be that kind of artist. They were teaching it to make you think about what it means to be creative. Like if I could speak French, that would not necessarily make me a French poet. And
beautiful how you said that, though. You know, they're teaching a language, but that's not the end all be all.
That's not the end all be all. No.
It's a language, it's form, it's seeing, it's working through it. But then you have to take that set and work with it however you can.
Yeah. And it might be about rejecting it. It could easily be about rejecting it. But it's hard to be nowhere, without any place. I always I liken it to standing in a sandbox, and the sand in the sandbox is everything that you already know. So that's my modernism. But you got one foot in the sandbox, and then you have another foot stepping outside of it. So you've got this language that gives you an anchor, and then you're trying to step outside of that and find other things. And if you jump completely out of the anchor, you just kind of float aimlessly in space. But if you've got something that gives you something to push up against, to either use or push up against, it becomes the way that you find your own voice, the way that you strip everybody else away and begin to find your own voice. It was a great school because the other thing that was great about it is that it still is, but it was a different school when I was there in the 70s. There were no grades. Nobody took attendance. Nobody said, are you here or not here? Everybody showed up for everything, and you didn't miss anything. We had a drawing class, a life drawing class. Most of us were not, perceptual painters, but we had a life drawing class that met 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, with the instructor there 2 days a week, and the other 3 days, and everybody always showed up, So it was just, I think that, we learn, I don't want to get up on too much of a pedestal here, but I think we learn by looking at other art. We learn from our teachers, and we learn from our peers. And those peers at that place were so, because they went there because there wasn't a real reason other than an absolute devotion to being an artist. So everybody stayed. I'm still friends with a lot of the people that I went to school with back in the 70s there. They're still practicing artists. We were talking a little bit about Glenn Goldberg earlier, or there are lots of people that Mark Zimmerbaum, whoever, but Mark is no longer with us, but people who nobody stopped. They kept going.
I love that. And I remember that was actually something you said when I was at Chautauqua 20 years ago, which I can't believe it's 20 years, but you said, look around. These are the people that are going to be your peers. And you're right. I mean, I ended up going to
Right.
school with Carrie Amarada to get my MFA, you know.
Right.
I still talk to quite a few of them, and they're all still making and doing their thing, you know. And I think there's something really beautiful in this idea because like you said, you can't eat your paintings, right? And we forge a way forward. We all figure out a way, right, to keep, like you said, feeding this addiction that we can't
We are
kind of
addicted. Yeah.
get rid of. And it's really lonely to do it alone without, you know, with people that don't get
Right.
it. Like
Right.
if you
Right.
and also as we grow in our own work, you were talking about learning from, you know, we learn from other artists, we learn from teachers, and we learn from peers. And I feel like even today, being able to talk to somebody who's been doing this the same time I've been doing it, we kind of boost each other up. And it's not like we're always like, that's a great painting. I'll be like, don't know what's going on over there, you know, and we
Yeah.
can have this dialogue so we can
Right. Right.
continue to grow,
And
you know?
it's a dialogue about the art, not about other things.
Mhm.
You know, my studio rent or the art world or
Mhm.
galleries, those are all important things to deal with in our life. But those are the people we talk with about, that we deal with, you know, in not just in the good times, but in the dark times. And in fact, they're the only ones who are still around in the dark times. You know, when
Yeah.
your studio rents just doubled, you lost your gallery, you don't have a connection anymore, and you call somebody up and they come to your studio and you realize I'm in this because for another reason. Not just that. That's sort of the accoutrements on the side.
Yeah.
Um, I also think it's the other thing about it. I don't know if I might be shifting the subject a little, but I think it's a really important thing too. It's not, you know, art is not something that happens on the side of who we are. It is in the
Mhm.
middle of who we are. And I'm not just talking about you and me. I'm talking about the history of the world. When we
Mhm.
look back at the great cultures of the world, when we look back at the great civilizations of China or Mesopotamia or Egypt or the Renaissance or any of those places. Go on. I can the Incas and the Mayans. What we look at before anything else is their art. That's how we define what we are as the human race, is through their art first. That's the first thing we look at. So we're not like dessert on the sidelines. We're not like decoration. We're like critical to what we are on a spiritual level as human beings. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, that we are not on the sidelines, whether people recognize it or not, but we are not on the sidelines. You know, 1,000 years from now, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. I go to Italy every year. I spend a lot of time there. I've been to Pompeii probably 20 times.
Mhm.
I go every time I go to Pompeii, I go to the Villa of the Mysteries and I look at the frescoes on the walls in the Villa of the Mysteries. And I'm looking at those frescoes, and every time I get goosebumps. 20 times, at least 20 times I've looked at them. And they speak to me. Those frescoes that I look at in the Villa of the Mysteries that were painted more than 2,000 years ago in a culture that that their language is dead.
Mhm.
They never saw, you know, a light bulb, let alone a podcast.
Mhm.
They never saw a human being travel faster than a horse could run. All of that, and I look at it and it communicates to me. That's the power of art. That's what art is about. You know, it's not about, you know, am I uh, successful in this way or that way, or do I have the right gallery, or do I have this or that? We have to pay attention to that, but and I'm not anti that, but that's what the real thing is about.
Yeah.
Is is that the fact that I can go to the Villa of the Mysteries, you can go to the Villa of the Mysteries, anybody, and it will talk to you across culture, across time, across language, across everything. It's the maybe, I'm not sure, but probably the oldest form of communication. I don't know, we're way past Lascaux now. We're back to like 60,000 years ago, where people are making images on walls in order to communicate. I'm sure they were making music then, but we don't have it. But we do have those images. And I can look at those images and get excited too, so that's one of the amazing things about art.
It's so incredible because it's this like universal truth, and I think something that I have been personally thinking about my own practice, and I hear you kind of talking about it, is this idea that at the end of the day, like, yeah, galleries, this, that, whatever, they're there, and we have to deal with it. That's just the
You
day
do.
to
It's
day.
just
That's
the
like
day
doing
to
the
day.
dishes. You know what I mean?
Exactly. It's like doing the dishes. Yeah.
And then we have this core truth that I think speaks to the fact that we are finite. Like, we're here for however many years, And I think there's something about that for me anyway, when I'm working, that this will go on. This is a communication. This is kind of what I'm talking about. This is the human spirit. And that's really where I think that's where we love making art. We
Right.
talk about deeper truths, and then you can feel that when you're looking at these frescoes. Again, there's like that communication that happens.
Yeah.
And I
And
think
it's
that's
not, yeah,
beautiful.
it's
Mhm.
not, and we have this mistaken idea that there's progress.
Mhm.
They were worried about the same things we're worried about. It's the same things. It is, and there's this mystery out there, what happens down. I don't know what happens. We have this little minute, of existence on a little blue speck that's like smaller than our minute, it seems, in terms of how big the universe is. So I don't know. It feels to me like I don't know what else I could do, because it's like the most positive thing I could possibly do is try to communicate with other people somehow in
Yeah.
a contributory way, not in a preaching way, in
Yeah.
a way that says, I want to add this to your experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Human to human, like without judgment, without any of these other preconceived things. Like,
Right.
hey, I see you there and I'm here. We're all, for this time.
Uh-huh.
Um, you mentioned being in Italy, and I love you have been going to Italy for how many years now? How many?
Oh, 35 years.
I know I was gonna say it's been quite some time.
Long time, yeah.
And I normally I love asking artists about like what a day in their studio looks like. But before I ask you that, I want to ask what a year in your life looks like, because you are like moving and grooving all over the place, Don.
I,
We'll start with that.
I, I can't, I do at the end of the year, you kind of go through your old photos. Oh my God, I can't believe this much happened this year. It's like, holy shit, where did all this come from? You kind of go through day to day and you're kind of getting from yesterday to today, but it is a year for us is, and I say us, because my practice involves my wife in a lot of ways too. But just because I think what we do as artists, it's like our whole life. It's not the time in the studio, it's everything. Uh, you mentioned doing the dishes, but I think, if I'm sitting there doing the dishes, I'm thinking about something. It's all part of the practice. The whole thing is part of I remember going down to Peter Agostini, who's a 60s sculptor, going into his loft, and he said, oh, the only time I'm not doing my practice is if I'm watching an advertisement on television. Yeah. But a year is it's always fun to look at these years. I mean, they go. My year is normally I spend some time. I spend maybe half the year teaching. Then I spend summer a good chunk of time in Italy. I used to then spend the summers at Chautauqua for 33 years. I did that. And did all of that at the same time, and then had shows and showed my work and spent time in New York. I've finally had to decided, we really have to give up doing Chautauqua about 6 years ago, and it was like, oh my God, look at how much time there is in the summer. which I never knew. Oh, this is why people like to get a teaching job. But but then I went and started that residency in Italy. So a year is, it's hard to say what a year is like. It's we're kind of generally operating in 3-month segments.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, I
and
love
my trick on that, just as a practical thing for people who end up doing these things, is when I never leave the place I'm at without leaving some work half finished, because that way, when I go back the next time, I'm ready to rock and roll right away. Otherwise, I got to figure out how to start up again. And that was something I learned a long time ago. I would always leave some work, at least one piece, 2 pieces, not finished, so that I could walk into the studio and start working again, and not say, what am I going to do this time? I just, I just got, it's kind of like the notion that when a jet airliner takes off from New York and flies to California, it burns most of its fuel before it gets past Pennsylvania. Because it takes so much energy to get up and get going. So I always, I'm finished. That's like a little thing I do when I'm traveling from one place to another a lot.
I'm going to take you up on that because, I love hearing about your year from a selfish perspective, because I feel like I have always had seasons where I would move around, and I feel like there's artists that do that, and then there's artists who do not do that. Like there's people who are just like in their one space, and that's great. Like there's not a right or wrong way. I think it just depends on your personality in life.
I agree.
So I think that that's really interesting to hear, this idea of always leaving something half finished there. And that leads me to my next question is, do you like, when you have your home studio, which you have this beautiful home studio. So when you have your home studio, or let's say in Chautauqua or in Italy, do you feel like you have a certain type of work that you make in that space? Like, did you have different series, or what did that kind of look like for you?
Well, the work I do in Europe is always small. The first time we lived in Italy, we lived there for a year, and I wasn't going to let it bother me, size, and I did all this large scale work on steel, and it's all still over there, So after that, I started making things that were small enough that I measured the suitcase, where and I take so I mostly work on smaller things in Italy, things I can transport in a suitcase, not have to worry about customs and shipping and all that kind of stuff. At the end of that first year, I found out it was going to cost me $6,000 to get my work back, so my work just stayed over there. So the work in the studio here at home is I can do bigger pieces, and I can work on them forever. I have that big painting. We squeezed through it, but you might have it in the images I sent to you. I worked on that painting for years. It's a painting. It's an equality symbol, and I'll just flip this real quickly.
Yeah,
it's this painting here, and it's 16 feet long and 10 feet high. And I've worked on that painting for many, many years, but that I can work on big things at home because I can come back to them in a different way. I can walk down here in the middle of the night and do something to it if I want to. So I do have different ways of working in different spaces. Yeah.
So that leads me to my next question, which is, how do you typically start a painting? Like, are you doing like preparatory pieces? Do you dive in? Like, how do you start a piece?
That's a good question. The way I start okay, I mean, without getting too far into it, in 2003, we were up at Chautauqua. The neighbor called. My studio at that time was on the first level of the house. Second level was maybe 6 feet off the ground with steps, kind of not like the way a brownstone has steps that go down, and it'd be like the garden level would be my studio. So we got a call from the neighbor that water was coming out the front door on the second level. And what had happened is a pipe burst, and my studio filled up with water, and it destroyed all of my works on paper for my whole life.
Oh,
And also a lot of other work, all my photos, all the photos of our family growing up, all that kind of thing. So I everything was destroyed. So the way I started painting now is I find one of those old photos, like this one. And I just start riffing off of that photo. I have no idea what that photo was, but almost everything I've done for the last 20 years has been taking, I have thousands of these. These are the pieces that were destroyed. Sometimes it's photos of my work. Sometimes it could be photos of my kids. I have no idea. If you look at this, let's see what's behind me here. Yeah, these three are all done from photos of, they were taken from photos that were destroyed. That becomes my starting point. It's like the way a jazz musician has a series of chords that they riff off of. I just start with that, start working, and then it becomes a dialogue. It's between me and, we start talking to each other, me and the surface. And new ideas come up in the process, but it's always a conversation between that chance thing that happened and the necessity that it implies somehow. And I feel like I'm just along for the ride. I'm not even controlling it. It's not absence of control the way, say, Pollock was about absence of control. It's following a preset rhythm that was established by an event that almost killed me. Literally, I went into a depression that lasted 3.5 years after losing all that work. And but it's been actually one of the best things that ever happened to me too. So that's how I started painting. It's not, I use the first part of my life to work on the second part of my life.
that's so interesting to me. Yeah, the first part of my life and the work that was destroyed and then setting you into this, depression. I can't imagine. I'm sure it was terrible. And then how you said you're now kind of not glad it happened, but it has spurred so much. It has like
things that never would have, I never would have been able to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just talking to an artist about this that's going through something really hard. And, I was thinking about how sometimes the worst things that can happen to us, because, what we've been talking about is art is central to us as beings. Art is our life. Everything centers around this. So when a catastrophic thing happens and we change as people a little bit, I mean, art doesn't change, we change. And then our art changes in response to it. And it's so painful, but what comes out of it can be incredibly beautiful. It's that conversation, it's like almost counterintuitive, but it happens,
It happens a lot. It's actually, and I think about this a lot in terms of the world today too. I mean, this is a microcosmic thing, but the level of destruction and that sort of thing is like really, I think about this a lot. But it's also part of what unifies us as none of us gets out of this really free. I mean, there's a line in Dante in the Inferno where he talks about, he says, I can't remember it exactly, but it was, I came upon a wood so dark and impenetrable, I thought I'd never survive. But in order to talk about what happened on the other side of that, I have to tell you about it. And it is even Dante is talking about, we hit this point where we think it's not possible to get through. And if we can survive, it takes us to another place. And that, I believe strongly that those downtimes, even though, they are hard when they happen. Depression is not an easy thing for anybody. And real depression is unfathomable. You can't explain it. And but if you can make it through, if you can just hold on, something else happens on the other side that is amazing. It can happen on the other side that's amazing. You have to keep your eyes open, you know. You have to keep pushing. When I had that depression after the flood, I did two things. I'd been teaching a long time at that point, so I was able to go in and fake it and teach. And I went to my studio every day, even though I didn't feel like it. And one day, 3.5 years into it, I'm in my studio working away, and I thought, I'm not depressed. So for me, it was like painting saved my life. You know, it allowed me to get to another place. I'm not saying, oh, it's easy to get to that other place. It's really hard to get to that other place. But it is something that we all experience. It's part of what life and death are about. You know, I mean, it's a big subject.
Well, it makes me think of what you said earlier, where, we were talking about how we like to think we're so advanced now, right? But we're still grappling with the same things that Dante was grappling with. It's again,
exactly.
It's in condition. It is what it is. We are
It
not
calls
going
it
to have sparkly lives forever. There, these things happen. And so I love that you brought that up. That getting through the dark forest, and you have to talk about that in order to get to the other side. I'm also curious about your work. Do you work on more than one piece at a time? And if so, how many? I'm assuming yes, because you have pieces that are unfinished. I'm the same way. I'm always working on multiple pieces. I'm curious, like, about how many. Do you have like a ballpark that you're kind of working on right now, or?
It's, I love having my studio in the house because it's, I used to have to drive to my studio, get dressed, get a shower, get dressed, get in the car, drive to my studio. But, now it's like little things can happen. I can work on this little set of thing. I got a bunch of little small pieces like this size going, just that size. You can't really see them in the video, but they're very small. And I've got those going. And then I have, when I don't know what to do, I'll just pick up one of those and start working on it. I work on basically, if it's in my studio, it's open season. So everything is up for grabs. I have paintings that the only paintings I don't touch anymore are the ones I did 40 years ago when I was working in the landscape, when I was a landscape painter. I leave those alone. I had great advice. Lee Krasner said to me, that when she came and did a studio visit once, and I was getting really frustrated with making nice landscapes. And I said, I'm going to cut these up and do something with them, because she had cut all her work up and made collages out of them. And she said, save 4 of them.
I love that. I was just looking actually at Chautauqua at a book of Lee Krasner's, pieces where she had cut up the old ones that made these collages. Just looking at that this summer, and I kept thinking, God, these feel so contemporary. I mean, they are. I don't know. But that's so funny. Save 4 of them.
I mean, a specific number. So I did save 4 of them, and I will not touch those paintings. But everything else is up for grabs. I usually, right now I have 5 medium-sized paintings going, 1, 2, 3, 4 medium-sized paintings going, like maybe 5 feet high, and a big one on the wall over here. And then I've got maybe probably a dozen small pieces on paper that I'm still working on and don't know if they're finished or not. And they're the first things I pull out when I sit down at the desk here.
That was going to be my next question. Is I always love hearing about when you walk into your studio, like, do you have a rhythm that you kind of follow, or what does that look like for you?
I do have a rhythm. It's walk into the studio, works on paper, and I probably have rock and roll on the or blues on the music. And by the end of the day, I'm working on a big painting, and it's all classical music if I have music on at all, you know. Sometimes I just shut the classical music off because it's too interrupting.
Mhm.
But that's I'll start off with something that's like just getting my blood going. That's all. I'll listen to AC/DC or something. And and then by the end of the day, it's Beethoven or Chopin or something like that. And there really is sometimes when I'm really into it and I feel like, oh, I might be here till the middle of the night, the music goes off. And
Yeah.
nobody can hear me. I just don't want any like my brain is completely in the painting. So
Yeah, I always had this thought too, like for me anyway, like I'll start with music. I love it, like getting the blood flowing, everything or something. But there hits a certain point where I feel like we're kind of conduits of sorts, like you're having that back and forth with the painting, and then the music kind of starts to hijack it. Like I call it
exactly.
emotionally hijacking you. So you
Yeah.
got to turn it off
Yeah.
because of that give and take. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly what I mean. That's a great way to interpret it, that it hijacks it.
Yeah.
Your brain, we use different parts of our brain for different things, And the thing that's the worst, I never put the radio on because I don't want anybody to talk at all. That really just pulls me right back out. All of a
Mm.
sudden, I'm like complaining about Trump in my head or something. And
Oh, the news right now, it's just like, oh my
oh yeah,
God. Right?
yeah.
Yeah. It just,
And I don't want that when I'm trying to work. So that's the rhythm of the studio. I also have the other thing I did, because this is my new dream studio. I just built this year. Is I've got a really this is a really comfortable couch. Like it's so I can shift one thing to another. I don't want to sit there and stare at things for a long time, but I have a really nice couch in my studio. That if I want to step back, I can sit in the couch. And I have this chair is a ergonomic chair. So I can sit in this chair. I have a desk here that's it's about 40 inches by 10 feet.
Mhm.
And this is what I do my work on paper on. And this chair, I can sit in this chair all day long and my back never hurts. So
uh, see, that's the good thing. I remember talking with Stanley at one point, Stanley Lewis. For those who aren't familiar with his work, he's incredible. But he was talking about how he used to try and just stand all day, and now he's kind of paying. We all get older, right?
yeah, right. Yeah.
So getting those spaces where
Yeah.
because an art is such a physical thing, and I think it's funny because when you're younger, it's physical, but you don't have any limitations exactly.
Right. You can do it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, you start to get these like aches and pains or things like for me, I have to almost like warm up my hands and wrists or and so, yeah, taking care of those things. So I love that you have this wonderful new studio with this great couch and this chair. And you just recently finished building it. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. In fact, I'm still doing a little bit on it. I haven't put a new floor in it yet. I've just got the subfloor down, but everything else is done. We just finished this a month ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Oh, the
that's
dream
great.
space.
I've got a 45-foot working wall. It's 45 feet long and 13 feet high. And then another wall that's 10 by 45. And then I've got all my art books are in here down by the couch.
Mhm.
I love looking at books much more than images online. I much rather look at books well, for the images online, they could be any color that you're looking. You have no idea what the color really is. In a
Mhm.
book, not that they're perfect, but if you buy decent art books, the color is sometimes much better. It usually is better than what you can get online.
Oh yeah, online it can even be like how your settings are, but I love that you have this space. And for those people listening, I've heard this story that you've been working towards this studio because I think some artists I talk to can get
Oh,
really down and out because they're like working in their kitchen, and I'm like, hey, there's
oh,
nothing wrong with that, like we've got
oh.
to work however we can. And now you've got this incredible space that you've really worked towards. I mean, you have kind of a fun story for it too.
Yeah. My story for the studio is I have to do that, talk about this, and then talk about Giacometti. But my story about the studio is when I got my first teaching job, that year I scraped together $3,500. I saved an extra $3,500, and I put it in a not a savings account. It was like an account that had tiny bit of risk, but not I wasn't going to lose it. And then I just said, I'm not going to pay any attention to this. So I did that 35 years ago. Never touched the account, never did anything to it. And I've been thinking about retiring from teaching. I probably won't ever retire from teaching. I'm going to be like other people, like, Elizabeth Murray didn't retire from teaching. Ad Reinhardt never retired from teaching. See, it's not a bad, if you enjoy it and you want to, and it's not a labor, it's a love, then just do it. For most people, it's not that, but for me, I get a lot out of it. But anyway, so I've been thinking about it. So I looked at the account, and it had $130,000, had turned into $130,000. $3,500 turned into $130,000. And so I built this studio with the 45-foot and the wall and 13-foot ceiling and beautiful patio outside for $129,000. So, or I built it for $3,500. So if you're smart, young artist, find $3,000 or $4,000, stick it somewhere and forget that you have it. Okay.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
And I also had to wait 35 years for it. I didn't have it when I was 25.
Yeah.
Anybody who says they can't make work because they don't have the right studio space is not an artist. It just isn't. What I wanted to say about Giacometti is that there's a great story about him in coming back from Europe shortly after the war, and he goes into Sidney Janis and says, I'd like to do a show. And Giacometti had been running around, staying away from Nazis, had no studio space. And Janis says, where's your work? And he says, oh, I have it here. And he says, what? And Giacometti pulls two matchboxes out of his pockets. And he's got two matchboxes full of those little tiny, ethereal figures. And that's what he had worked on for 2 years on the kitchen table. He kept working, he kept making art. Just you work with what you can work with. And there's always somebody who has it better, and there's always somebody who has it far worse. And you just go with what you have, and make music with what you have. It's another favorite story of mine. Is Yitzhak Perlman is giving a concert in Houston, and he's playing along with the full symphony orchestra, and in the middle of his concert, the violin string snaps. And as you know, Perlman had polio as a child, so he has leg braces and he can't walk and all that kind of thing. And so this loud snap in the middle of the concert, and you realize one of the major strings has snapped. And so they stopped, and everybody expected Perlman to either have somebody bring him a new violin or to put a new string on, or go off stage, walk off stage with his crutches and get something else, whatever. And instead, Perlman, after it snapped, looks at the orchestra and tells them to begin again from where they left off. And he kept playing on a violin with 3 strings instead of 4. And there were points in the concert where it almost sounded like he was detuning strings in order to get new sounds from them. And he finishes, I know you can't play a symphonic work with a 3-string violin, you know that. But Perlman refused to let that be true. And he finished the concert. And at the end, the audience just went nuts. And he made a piece. He played a piece in a way that even Perlman, when he walked out on the stage, didn't know he could do. You know, so
That is so good. I love that. That is so good. And it just goes back to this like creative being, spirit, artistic drive. And that's like where the real these incredible moments can happen. I can't remember. I remember talking one time to John Walker, and he was talking about Guston, and Guston would call it not a ringer, but something where it's something totally different that you make out of the norm that even you didn't know you could do. And
you didn't know
those,
you could do. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's why these interruptions, I mean, interruption is a kind of a nice small word, you know, losing all of your work in a flood is not, but that was my interruption. These interruptions, that's where creativity happens. You either whine about it or you do something. And you know, it's been the source of, I'm actually working on a book where that plays a big role in the book. Is it's a lot, it's just a lot of stories like the Perlman one I just told you. But I've been working on it forever. I just haven't found a publisher yet. But it's a bunch of stories about what happens to people who it's not a, life is not about what happens to you. It's not about you know, after you get to the point where you've got yourself covered for shelter and food, life is not about what happens to you. It's about how you respond to what happens to you. And that's what artists do, is they respond in a way that is creative. Creativity is it's not a luxury, it's a survival skill. So
That is, I love that, Don. Thank you for sharing that. You know, I was going to ask for any like advice that you'd like to share with the listeners, and maybe you still have some more, but I feel like that is just
perfect.
perfect. It's perfect. Yeah. Yeah. Those interruptions, it's what you do with it. And that's where the art really comes out. So
that's where it comes out. It's after the interruption. Yeah, I'm good with letting it go there.
well, Don, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show and for sharing, you know, your work, your life, and more with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Erica. It's been fun talking to you. Okay. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.